41 years old. Construction worker, dead. His doctor called it medically appropriate. Low addiction risk. Manageable. 3 years later, no job, no apartment, no life. Overdose. He was not an isolated case. He was one of 500,000, and every single investigation that followed pointed to the same place: the drug company, the pill, the prescription. Nobody looked at the second layer. One firm designed the strategy behind the epidemic, collected the fees, and walked away clean. This is the case file. At the exact moment his doctor handed him that prescription, a consulting firm had already identified his doctor's zip code as a high-value target, had already mapped which physicians in that region were most likely to prescribe, had already built the incentive structure to make sure they kept prescribing. His outcome was not a personal failure. It was a data point inside a revenue model. That is where this autopsy begins. McKinsey and Company. Most people have never heard the name. That is not an accident. McKinsey is the world's largest management consulting firm. They do not manufacture products. They design the strategy behind the organizations that do. Governments, banks, pharmaceutical companies, half the Fortune 500. Their model is straightforward. A corporation identifies a problem. McKinsey maps the system, builds the playbook, collects the fee, moves to the next client. The distance between advice and consequence is structural. By the time the consequences materialize, McKinsey is no longer in the room. That distance is not incidental. It is the product. In the early 2000s, Purdue Pharma hired McKinsey to solve one problem. OxyContin sales growth was slowing. What followed was documented. Internal communications, specific recommendations, operational and granular. First, they targeted the doctors. Prescription data identified which physicians were writing the highest opioid volume. Sales resources concentrated on those physicians specifically. McKinsey's own language called them the most valuable targets. Then they accelerated the volume. McKinsey's internal documentations used one word to describe their strategy: turbocharge. For opioids. While overdose deaths climbed year on year, then they fought the restrictions. When insurance companies began limiting opioid coverage, McKinsey advised Purdue on how to push back, how to reframe opioids as medically necessary for broader conditions, how to eliminate friction in the prescribing process, how to keep the pipeline open. Then they protected the narrative. When public pressure mounted and media coverage increased, McKinsey advised on messaging, how to sustain sales momentum, how to manage the story. Each layer tightened around the same objective: revenue growth. These are not allegations. These are documented recommendations. in their own words. In 2021, McKinsey settled with 49 US states for $60 million. They did not admit wrongdoing. The settlement was less than their total consulting revenue from Purdue. Is held at every stage. This is not a story about a villain. Villains stop the analysis at the individual. This is a story about an incentive structure. Purdue Pharma had a revenue problem. McKinsey's business model is solving revenue problems. There was no mechanism inside that engagement to account for downstream harm. Harm was not a variable in the module. Growth was the variable, and the system optimized for growth. McKinsey has advised ICE on detention operations, has advised governments cutting healthcare access, has worked simultaneously for corporations and the regulators overseeing them. The pattern is consistent. The firm maps the system for whoever is paying. The consequences fall somewhere else. Is the second layer of power. The public sees the corporation. The corporation sees McKinsey. Legal accountability rarely crosses that boundary. By the time an investigation reaches the strategy layer, the engagement is closed. The files are archived. The consultants have moved on, and what remains is the playbook and the consequence of running it. 111,000 Americans died of drug overdoses in 2023. The opioid crisis is not a historical event. It is an ongoing condition. McKinsey is still operating, still advising, still billing over $1 billion per year. This is how the accountability gap functions. The firm that designs the strategy operates one layer above the outcome. The corporation that executes it carries the legal exposure. The individual who consumes the product carries the physical consequence. Each layer insulates the one above it. That is the architecture. The system does not malfunction. It performs exactly as designed. The optimization works. The revenue grows. The harm distributes downward. The firm moves to the next engagement. Purdue Pharma was prosecuted. The Sacklers was sued. The pill was blamed. McKinsey settled, admitted nothing, returned a fraction of the fees. The epidemic is profitable. The epidemic continues. The firm continues. The architecture remains. That is the case file. Power Autopsy.